Good day, global citizens. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Fadiamola's Opinion. On today's episode, I have a senior colleague, a professor, who doesn't want me to use the title professor. Yes, someone who I learned from actively and passively. Actually, I grew more interest in research, although I never told him I grew more interest in research by following him on Twitter and see him share his research publications and discussing on them. So it's an honor to have you on this platform. Please join me to welcome Dr. Abioye.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for the invite. The impact that placental malaria has on pregnancy outcomes. Pregnant women go through malaria, and I will say at any point in time in African countries where the malaria is where there's high burden of malaria, you can imagine that there's hundreds of thousands of women who are pregnant at any point in time. And if many of them are at risk of malaria, then think about how the impact potentially cascades if iron supplementation. So the hypothesis was that providing iron supplements increases the risk of malaria. But we need to provide iron supplements. The risk of iron deficiency increases. So
Okay,
unless you're supplementing the iron, almost every woman is going to end up at the time of of delivery, they're going to be anemic, right?
exactly.
So just by the natural cause alone. So, but how do we then supplement the iron without increasing the risk of placental malaria, which then has its own adverse consequences? So I found that question fascinating.
Nigeria and Tanzania.
Yeah, I would say that it's the huge burden, right? When we so before I started to work in this space, I didn't quite. I mean, I kind of knew it on an academic basis that anemia is common, but you don't fully grasp it because you're not thinking about it all the time.
Worked across different age groups. I want to know, is there any difference in prognosis on iron supplementation in children and adults living with HIV?
So HIV is a more challenging topic, and have kind of stayed away from HIV as we've discussed. I've mostly focused on like pregnant women, malaria, because HIV has its own huge other aspect. So the long and short is that we don't really know much as far as HIV is concerned, right? I'll tell you what we know about HIV. We know that anemia is a problem in HIV. We can say with some certainty that HIV patients who have anemia have a much higher risk that they're going to die within the next year. So maybe 3 times higher risk, which is substantial. So we know that. We also know that that serum ferritin, which is a measure of iron status, along the line, once a person starts taking HIV treatment, that the serum ferritin levels will decline. And we don't know whether this decline in serum ferritin levels is it happening because their body is using up the iron, or it's happening because as they're getting treated now, the serum ferritin level was high before because of inflammation. I said that it's an acute phase reactant, right? If it was high before because of inflammation and now it's declining, is that just the impact of the antiretroviral therapy? Right. So 2 things I have said. First is that if the person has anemia, there's a higher risk of death. Second is that once they start antiretroviral therapy, their ferritin levels are dropping, and so we're wondering, are they getting worse in terms of iron deficiency? We don't know for sure, but we know to some degree that if they do have increased risk of iron deficiency and they have anemia, so it's kind of more challenging in that regard. We know that the anemia is bad for them, but we don't know for sure if iron deficiency is bad for them. And there have been some studies where they have actually treated.
To anemia iron levels. When anyone mentions anemia, what are the 3 words that come to your mind?
Um, when a person mentions anemia, I think about
Yes, to hold on to on iron metabolism.
Okay. So I'll just describe very briefly and say that when a person consumes iron in their diet, so we all consume iron in our diet, whether we like it or not. The question is, what extent of iron are we consuming? And the diet that a person has, if you have diet that is rich in animal source proteins, like meat, red meat especially, then they're likely to be consuming high amounts of iron. Or certain leafy vegetables also are rich in iron. And when you consume iron,
Dr. V, for painting a detailed picture for us. Do you have a closing statement? Everything looks simple and summarized because you are an expert. Thank you so much.